for those who don't know, I used to be a high school social studies teacher. Sometimes I can't turn that off. And we have an article to talk about today from Christianity Today, and I read it, and suddenly my teacher hat went back on. It was awkward. I don't look good in hats. But nonetheless, it turns out I thought it was an article like describing a situation, but it was ultimately a persuasive piece, an opinion piece. And whenever you look at this kind of thing, you have to do a couple of things. One of them is, what is the problem or issue being discussed? You have to figure that out. What's the solution from the person that they're proposing? And why are they writing this?
Mm-hmm.
Like some people write things because they have, I don't know, just some sort of like personal interest in it. Others have a more direct motive on why they would do it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to do that with this article. It's called Rites of Passage Can Help Boys Become Men. Here's the problem plainly stated in the piece at the very beginning. The author, Mark Perkins, writes, twin crises afflict contemporary America. Book titles like The Great Dechurching and The End of Men label them well. Put briefly, many churches failed to lead young men into Christian maturity, while contemporary culture fails to bring boys into mature manhood. And he even brings up girls are outpacing boys in schools and increasingly in the workplace and in general health. American girls face challenges no less severe, but they're different. So that's the problem. He's saying it's dechurching and a culture that fails to transition boys into manhood. Do we agree with him on the problem?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, church sizes are going down, number of people are Christians going down, and it's failure to launch is what we've talked about before, right? And it's the stereotype of a young man who lives in mommy's house in the basement, and she takes care of him in his 30s or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's got a solution, and he thinks this solution to it will solve both problems at once. His solution, rites of passage.
Okay, I can see that for the, training men, but rites of passage to not leave church? I don't know.
I think his idea would be that a Christian rite of passage done well would not only turn boys into men, but would show them the value of community in church, and therefore they would, as a natural consequence, be church attenders.
Okay.
So he says rites of passage involve 3 stages. Because he says in the piece, and he's right, we don't really do rites of passage in America. He says most cultures in world history do rites of passage. Do you think he's right about that from your knowledge?
Yeah. A pastor at a church I used to attend actually did do rites of passage with his boys.
What was it for him?
So when they turned, I think it was like 12 or 13, like he was really big into like camping. So when they turned 12 or 13, he would take them out into the wilderness with no food and a Bible. They had like their fishing gear and their camping equipment and a Bible, and that's all they had. And they would survive. And there was more to it than that, but like he had like specific lessons that he wanted them to learn in specific ways that he would teach them through like a week in the wilderness with them.
Sounds like Pastor Scott.
Yeah. Like I'm already a little nervous. I'm glad he didn't invite me.
I know, right?
I don't think I'd make it.
I remember thinking, I was the same age as his oldest. I'm like, I'm glad that's not my dad.
Right.
He's a good friend of mine, but I'm glad he's not my dad.
And for years, Focus on the Family with Dr. James Dobson, they put forward the whole idea of preparing for adolescence. And you would have a weekend where mom would take the daughter or dad would take the son, and you'd go away for a weekend and you work through this workbook and a set of cassette tapes at the time. And
I did that.
Yeah,
with my dad.
Okay.
My poor dad. It was super awkward. I love you, Dad, if you're watching this. We brought the Dobson tapes. We went to a resort.
Oh, yeah.
And the stuff covered in there, not super comfortable to hear it with your dad.
Mm-hmm.
So we would both sit there in absolute silence, listen to the tapes. And when they would stop, he'd go, all right, let's go swimming. We'd go hang out we had a blast at the resort, but it was more like awkward. But yeah, that was a rite of passage of sorts. I didn't even think I did one, but look at me. I did one.
Yep.
And historically speaking, you hear about, for example, the Spartans. You send somebody out to like fight a wolf, a kid, and if they make it back, they're a man. In Australia, right, you hear about walkabouts. Like you go out in the wilderness and try to survive, kind of like that pastor.
Or like even like a bar mitzvah.
Yes.
And like they have to do like memorize certain scriptures and passages and, present it to the congregation.
I didn't even think about that, but you're right. Generally speaking, modern Christian America, I don't know that we have that. Do we? Other than Darius Pastor.
No, he's an odd one for many reasons.
So, okay, he says rites of passage involve 3 stages. First, a boy is temporarily removed from the domestic family. Second, he's initiated into manhood through challenge. Finally, the emerging young man is assimilated into a group of peers and an adult vocation. Does that sound about right? Sounds more intense than what we just described.
I don't know if our current society's set up for all of that to happen, but maybe you could take some parts of it.
Yeah, like it involves some sort of challenge away from family. I think it's essentially like away from for boys. Your mommy won't coddle you. Mm-hmm. Your dad's going to take you out and rough you up a little bit, like put you in the woods and make you find your food. Moms would bring snacks and make sure that you had, ate your meal before your dessert and things like that.
And what vocation do you mean they're going to get into when they're 12?
I think, I don't know. But it's more like, now you're a man, you've done this. And again, much of world history did this. Now, he gets biblical support for this. He's like, it's in the Bible. It's in Jesus' life. He says very specifically in the book of Luke, Jesus' youthful temple visit bears the unmistakable marks of each stage of the rites of passage. Like Jesus experienced a rite of passage. He was temporarily removed from his domestic family. He was initiated in manhood through challenge. And then he emerged, assimilated into a group of peers in his adult vocation. Ron is looking confused and Lauren is looking concerned.
Yeah, because I read the passage. And
give us the summary.
So it's when Jesus and his family go to Jerusalem for, I think it's the Feast of Passover. And he gets lost, quote, he gets lost.
It says he gets lost.
Yeah, or whatever the word is.
They lose him.
They lose him, yeah. And his parents leave. They assume they're like with a big caravan, they're a big group of people going back. And so they assume he's with the group. That's not not normal for the time. You assume he's with the group. Okay, it's fine. There's a bunch of people, family, whatever, friends. And they leave. And then after a day, they're like, where's Jesus? 12-year-old Jesus. Not here. So then they search for him for 3 days. They can't find him. So they go back and they find him in the temple with the teachers of the time. And then Mary's like, hey, what are you doing? You made me feel crazy. And I was scared.
Yeah.
And why did you do this to your mother? And he was like, well, it's fine. Don't you know? Like, it's fine. And then he goes back with them. So that's that story. Mm-hmm. I'm concerned because it feels this author had his 3 rights and he went and found a story in scripture that showed that.
Why would you feel that way? And again, as a side note, this is so important for all of us as followers of Christ to be critical thinkers. And just because someone is a good writer and makes a point the idea of rites of passage sounds good to me, doesn't mean that they're going to give you valid biblical support.
Yes. You can have good ideas and things that are well-intentioned and may work out well and not find them in scripture. What's concerning here is that it feels as you're putting your own thoughts into scripture and trying to make scripture say something that it's not saying.
Right.
And that's called eisegesis?
Yes.
Oh, I sounded fancy there.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, so eisegesis would be putting your own thoughts into scripture and making scripture say what you want it to, rather than looking at the context and the story and what's actually saying itself. Nowhere in this passage does this say, so then Jesus had these rites of passage so that he would become a man. And it also doesn't say after he came back from Jerusalem, then he was a man.
Right.
He was a Jewish boy. He's also going to do the bar mitzvah type of thing, whatever it was in that ancient culture.
Well, he has proof texting for some of these that he claims. Like he says, for example, during and before the story, he called him the boy Jesus. After that, just Jesus.
Would that be because this is the only account of his childhood we have? Like the next time,
forwards
the next time we see him, he's in his 30s.
But he also, like I read the tests, right? And the one I have the biggest problem with is the stage 2 of a rite of passage, according to the author, is he's initiated into manhood through challenge. I was like, what? And he says a 12-year-old boy making it in the big city for a day or two or whatever it was, that's the challenge.
I don't think so. I mean, we can reasonably assume he was in the temple for the majority of this time. It seemed he knew the teachers there relatively well, or he did come to know them very quickly. And 12 in that culture was on the cusp of manhood anyway. Like, it's not like what we think of 12-year-old as a literal child. Like, he's getting pretty close to being man of the house.
Yeah, and I don't think it was quite Home Alone, you know? Like, Lost in New York, Home Alone 2. Like, oh no, Kevin has to make it in New York. No, I don't think it was quite like that. Now, I don't want to be rude. I don't like how he did it, but I agree with Lauren that it seems like what he did is he had a really good idea about rites of passage and thought, here's how I can really persuade people. I'm going to take this and put it into a Bible verse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. It doesn't mean that he's wrong per se about the idea he has, but it's just not a wise idea to try to create theology that doesn't already exist.
Yeah. It's okay to have an idea that doesn't have a proof text in the Bible.
Yeah, there can be ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You could say there were rites of passage in Scripture. Sure, there were.
Yeah, if you've got ideas on how best to use AI for the glory of God, you're not going to find that in the Bible.
Correct.
Well, the thing is, I think there actually is arguably a rite of passage that Jesus had. It's just not this instance.
What would you say it is?
His 40 days in the desert.
Oh.
Yeah, but that throws the whole thing apart because he wasn't in adolescence in that.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's convinced that the rite of passage must happen around adolescence.
I mean, I don't know that is necessarily true. Why does it have to be 12?
I've got an answer to that. We're going to take a quick break. It's 7:20 on WCRF, because this is the question we always have to ask. When someone's trying to convince you of something, and you're kind of like, I don't know, you got to find out, why would they want to convince me of this? There's got to be a reason. We've been doing an intellectual exercise with a persuasive piece, an opinion article in Christianity Today, where a guy defines a problem. His name's Mark Perkins. He says, we got two problems in America. We got the great dechurching, and we've got men failing to launch. We got to fix these, and I have the solution. He says it's rites of passage. Think of, Daria's pastor taking his sons into the wilderness and making them survive.
Mm-hmm.
Those have value in history. Not a bad idea, okay, in and of itself. So he says, I have biblical support for this. And he cites Jesus' temple visit that extends a few days and his parents think he's lost, okay, in the Gospel of Luke. And we analyze that as a team, and it's kind of like, I'm not so sure. It feels like you love rites of passage, found a Bible verse that you kind of squeezed it in there. Doesn't that feel like that? We decided that. Mm-hmm. So what you have to do then is ask yourself, why would he do this? Because what most people will do is read this long enough to go, rites of passage? Yeah, I agree with the problem. Jesus did it. Now we should do it. Love me. I don't need to read the rest. Here's where I read it and I go, I understand why he did this. Here it is, at the very end. Quote, every family, every church, and every school must consider how to incorporate these principles. At the boarding school I am helping to launch, we invite high school boys to live alongside faculty families under a temporary rule of digital poverty.
So it's a pitch.
Is this a sales pitch?
Our curriculum pairs an education in the classics with small-scale agriculture and skilled trades, an embodied formation with real work and responsibility that comes from growing your own food and building your own buildings. You see?
Those are all good things to learn to do.
But it's a sales pitch. He twisted scripture for his sales pitch.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's where, again, this is the caution. We've seen these things before. Ron and I were chatting about it with our newer colleagues off the air. There's been numerous times where there's been controversies that swirl in Christian culture or discussions, and you don't watch enough of it or listen long enough to see, I see what the person's doing. They're trying to sell a book. Mm-hmm. And in this case, the guy's trying to get people to sign up for his new boarding school. You're shaking your head, Lauren.
It's disappointing.
Why?
Because people aren't going to read the entire article. First
No,
of all,
they're not.
It was
Correct.
a very long article. And so people are not going to read the entirety of the article. And so they're just going to see your name and maybe your credentials and decide that, oh, what he's saying is true. Jesus did these rites of passage, and I'm going to believe that, and now I'm going to make everybody in my life do it, when that's not necessarily what's happening in Scripture. And so you're twisting Scripture to what you want it to be.
And now, in a sense of caution, it's not heresy.
No, not at all.
We're not, well, we're kind of mad at him, but
I'm mad at him.
yeah. But this is where we have to be cautious. And I've said for a long time, we can't blame news media for our inability to properly consume what they give us.
You got to read.
You got to do the work.
You have to read and have your ears and eyes on, not just consuming.
And I debated whether to use the word, right? But I feel like there's a measure of skepticism we have to always be have in the back of our mind as we read from any source.
Right. Critical thinking.
That's a better phrase. We have to be thinking critically. Like, I'm reading this kind of going, I don't know if I agree with him about his depiction of Jesus. Just because he's a pastor of some sort doesn't mean he's right.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, yep, you're trying to get people to sign up for your boarding school. I understand. And here's the tragedy of it. He might not be wrong about boarding schools. I don't want to send my kids there. He might not be wrong about rites of passage.
Yeah.
I think there's nuggets of truth and wisdom in here. I just think the crux of his argument is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What if we ignore the way he twisted things and just say, is he right about rites of passage could change manhood in the church?
I think it could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, then you have to decide what rites of passage look like, because we've had these conversations about biblical manhood is not a one-size-fits-all thing. My pastor took his boys camping because they, as a family, love to do that. So this was a way to show them practical skills, doing something that they already have experience and love of doing. Not every father has the ability or desire to do exactly what my pastor did.
Are you talking about me?
Are you going to take your
Talking
kids
about my
to go
dad,
build
too.
a fire?
No. I use some sort of accelerant and sometimes literally to
And
start
you
a
don't
bonfire,
go camping.
a weed torch. Sarah will be like, stop, it's lit, you know? So, yeah, I think the concept of rites of passage is a good idea, but I just don't know. Like, I don't know that I can manufacture something that would fit every one of my kids at the same age or range of age, where we could do it and then be done and go, and now you're a man.
Mm-hmm.
I think it happens gradually.
Yeah. And there are things along anyone's life that perhaps your father is skilled in auto mechanics and repairs his own car. And you start out handing him the wrenches and you learn to identify a 3/4 from a 1/2 inch from millimeters, and you learn along the way. And pretty soon you're helping to put a part in, and then he's holding it for you to tighten up the nuts and on that way. And that's kind of a rite of passage in a longer term.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is the rite of passage, my children will never make it.
Yeah, mine neither.
Something to think about. I think there's two things in this. Maybe Friday we'll talk more about rites of passage, but
No, we won't be here.
right. So I hope you enjoyed it. It's over.